Good evening, everyone. Hebrews chapter 11. We're actually going to start in verse 17. I have a sentence or two that I want to read from Matthew Martin's book on the book of Hebrews. Because I think it's a good reminder of what's going on for these Christians who were struggling in their faith, some were thinking of giving it up, going back to the law of Moses, and so especially after spending 10 chapters essentially dealing with here's the plan of God, and this is why it is so much better. And now, chapter 11, here's a practical vantage point of what faith looks like and what these folks need to have that same kind of faith. And so you have these examples that are given. Brother Martin writes this. He says, "Now consider the pressure on these Christians living in that same land." Remember where Abraham was going to be sent, right? So we've been studying Abraham already, so we got into that last week. And so living in that same land, now inhabited by those descendants of Abraham, these Christians who are also of a Hebrew descent, so they're children of Abraham, basically, blood brothers with the residents of Jerusalem here in the first century, and now they're treated as outsiders, which must have been what Abraham might have felt like in his life, right? So just think about that as Abraham is being used as an example. Now they're the ones being treated as outsiders, as Abraham was, as a sojourner and pilgrim. And they are now seen as traitors to the Jewish faith, having followed the teaching of Jesus. And he goes on to say, like Abraham, there is the temptation maybe to turn back, but what they need is what Abraham had, and that was faith in God. And so I think I want to give Brother Martin credit for his statement in that particular chapter. I think it's on par for what we're studying, and what we're going to continue to study through the rest of this chapter is obviously about faith, and we're studying the faith of Abraham in particular, and we've covered these passages already. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out of a place in which God was going to show him, right? And by faith, then Abraham dwelt in a land, and he did so in tents with Isaac and Jacob, and so bringing them into that mix as well, as they were looking for a city that was built by God. Not a physical city, but they were looking for something eternal, something else that God had in mind for them. And we went through the map. We talked about Sarah. Sarah also showed that she had faith as well, and that connection, the fact that those men who visited her actually told her, "We heard you laughing and what you were thinking about," and that let her know that God meant what He said, that she was going to have a child. And so by faith, she is mentioned in there. And then these all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off. And going back to what we've talked about in verse 1, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. These were things that they were not able to see yet, except as we sometimes say with the eye of faith, right? They were able to see this city that God had in mind for them, whose builder and maker was God. They knew that there was something that was better. And so they were always looking for that. And they had hoped, obviously, in that. Before we get into verse 17, let's... So much for all these coming up one at a time. But anyway, these are the verses we're going to cover before we get back into Hebrews chapter 11. So let's go ahead and turn. Let's go to Genesis 17, verse 19. Genesis 17. Then God said, "No, Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his descendants after him." And so, clearly, God reminding them, this is not going to be by your plan that you have tried to come up with. You've tried to formulate this plan with Sarah's handmaid, Hagar. This is not going to be, it's not going to come by way of Ishmael. You're going to have a son. Sarah's going to have a son with you, and you're going to call his name Isaac. And my covenant will be with him. And so, just kind of setting the stage. Now, we come to Genesis chapter 22. Verses 1 through 12. Genesis 22, verses 1 through 12. Now it came to pass after these things that God tested or tried Abraham and said to him, "Abraham," and he said, "Here I am." Then he said, "Take now your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you." So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and the two of his young men went with him, and Isaac his son. And he split the wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place which God had told him. Then on the third day Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place afar off. And Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey. The lad and I will go yonder and worship, and we will come back to you." So Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering, laid it on his son Isaac. He took the fire in his hand, took a knife, and the two of them went together. But Isaac spoke to Abraham his father and said, "My father?" And he said, Here I am, my son." Then he said, "Look, the fire, the wood, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham said, "My son, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering." So the two of them went together. They came to the place of which God had told him, and Abraham built an altar there, placed the wood in order, and he bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched out his hand, took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." So he said, "Here I am." And he said, "Do not lay your hand upon the lad, or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and there behind him was a ram caught in the thicket by its horns. And so Abraham went, took the ram, and offered it for the burnt offering instead of his son. Verse 14 is interesting. I know that's beyond our text, but verse 14 is interesting. Abraham called the name of the place, "The Lord will provide." As it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. And so in Genesis 22, that's our text. We're going to get to Hebrews 11, obviously, but this is the source of the text. This is what's going on. This Isaac, the son of promise, according to Genesis 17, verse 19, the son of promise, he says, God tells him, he says, "You take Isaac, your only son, whom you love, and go sacrifice him." And this he did in testing Abraham. We're going to get all these texts in together, and then we will make some comments. Let's look at James. James chapter 2. James gives us an analysis of what's happened here. Especially as it pertains to faith. Genesis 2, after James makes the statement, by the way, "O foolish man, do you not know that faith without works is dead? Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered Isaac his son on the altar? Do you see that faith was working together with his works, and by works faith was made perfect," or complete? "And the scripture was fulfilled, which says, Abraham believed God, and it was accounted to him for righteousness. And he was called the friend of God. You see then how a man is justified by works and not by faith only," or faith alone. So James gives us an analysis of this as he is discussing the issue of faith. This is a passage that gave Martin Luther a great deal of heartburn. He called James basically a strawy epistle, so a strawy letter. Next, let's go to Romans chapter 4. Romans chapter 4. Verses 16 through 21. If somebody else would read, that would help me in my voice tonight.
Therefore it is of faith that it might be according to grace, so that the promise might be sure to all seed, not only to those who are of the law, but also to those who are of the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. As it is written, I have made you a father of many nations, in the presence of him he believed, God, who gives life to the dead, and calls those things which do not exist as though they did. Who, contrary to hope, in hope believed, so he became the father of many nations, according to what was spoken. So shall your descendants be. And not being weak in faith, he did not consider his own body already dead, since he was about 100 years old, in the deadness of Sarah's womb. He did not waver at the promise of God through unbelief, but was strengthened in faith, giving glory to God, and being fully convinced that what he had promised he was also able to perform, and therefore it was accounted to him for righteousness.
All right. Thank you for grabbing verse 22 in there. It was highlighted, so you had to read it, right? Makes perfect sense. Notice the concepts that are found in Paul's writing to the church at Rome. Faith that was according to grace. James uses the concept faith and works together in the discussion, and how all of these things work together. And this leading up to the discussion that Paul is going to get into in chapter 5 of the book of Romans, talking about being justified by faith. And so he gives that example of Abraham and his faith, and that it was according to grace. Where did grace come into this picture, by the way, in the story of Abraham? Okay, certainly by saving Isaac, but also offering grace to all mankind, right? Through Isaac, the son of promise, and his descendants through which the Christ would come. And so, obviously, the connection to grace is seen through faith as well. All right, let's go to our passage then in Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11, verse 17 through 19. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, in Isaac your seed shall be called, concluding that God was able to raise him up, even from the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative sense. Now there's a bunch to unpack, and so and we probably won't really get to it all because some of this we'll cover, we'll mention some things, but for time's sake, I have the rest of this month to finish the book of Hebrews, so you be aware. So after we deal with Abraham here, and this, there's much obviously that is discussed here about Abraham, and then a bunch that is discussed about Moses, and so those will be the key ones that we kind of clue in on, and then we will make our way on through Hebrews chapter 11. But this, again, this is a 3-day journey that that Abraham takes. He has his servants with him, and they help obviously take some of the stuff with them for the sacrifice and so on. But when God points out Mount Moriah, where he's supposed to go, he tells those servants, you stay back here, I and the lad, we're going to go yonder and worship. And so very clearly he was from Tennessee, right? Yonder, that's around here it's yonder, be yonder. But so he obviously this man's from the country, so he knows what yonder is. So they're going to go and worship. And it's interesting to me that through this whole 3-day journey, you know that there had to be some things going through Abraham's mind, right? Eventually, Isaac picks up on the fact that, hey, Dad, where's the sacrifice? Where's the sacrifice? God's going to provide. God's going to provide. And so in his mind, though, he's been working this out, hasn't he, for these 3 days? It becomes very clear. And he has it in his mind, well, okay, this is the son of promise. He's just going to raise him from the dead. He'll just have to raise him from the dead. Because we're going to come back, right? He tells the servants, right? I and the lad, we're going to go yonder and worship, and then we'll come back. He's not coming back by himself. So whatever it is, this faith that he has, we'd say this is the ultimate test, right? You're going to, at some point in time, Isaac has to figure out and go, Dad, I'm the sacrifice. He binds him, right? Ties him up. Lays him up on the altar on top of the wood and pulls the knife. Obviously, God tells him, do no harm. I know that you fear me. I know that it's as if he's already dead. And the Bible says, Isaac, whom he sacrificed, right? And so God knew his faith was tested. And there are people that have difficulty with this particular passage and thinking about Isaac, and it's not all that important, but obviously we're not told how old he is. He's young enough to still be a lad, whatever exactly that means. And there's various ideas about this. The usual ideas, he's 12, 13 years old. Josephus says that he was about 25 years old. And other writers, such as Adam Clarke, says that he was probably 33, because he's the type of Jesus, right? And so he's the type of the Christ, the one that would be sacrificed. All right? Yeah. It's as good as if he did it, right? Yeah. Not even. I can't even imagine. Absolutely. And I think, and that's a great point, and let's just camp there for a moment. When you think about offering and sacrifice and worship, because it says, I and the lad, we're going to worship, right? So worship for us, from the heart, what does that look like, right? It has to look like some type of offering. I mean, even David would make the statement, he would buy Araunah's threshing floor because he says, I can't offer God something that costs me nothing. There has to be some sacrifice in it, right? Something that's given. So how does that translate then to New Testament worship? How does that translate for us today? Yeah, absolutely. Has to be from the heart. So how does that look for us in a sacrifice, in an offering type of setting?
You know, it's fairly ironic, especially when you today the denominational world of worship and what that looks like, and the expectations of going to a service and being, of course, edification obviously happens for sure, but being filled through that worship service and going away as if you've gained a ton, and comparing that to what we're talking about here from a spiritual standpoint. After we conclude worship, there should be almost like a get done with losing, with giving, so almost fatigued emotionally, spiritually, to a point, fatigued that we gave as much as we did, that we are coming away from worshiping the God of the universe in a negative state, if you will, almost as if we left it all there. There are things that we came prepared to do that we left and we gave it, right? And I think a lot of times, especially now, when you're looking at even just Blount County as a whole, when you go on Sunday morning at 9:30 or 10 o'clock, in this county, there are people who are in buildings expecting to receive all of these things and coming out as if they're just energized, and I think we are to leave in a position almost where all energy has left us, because we are very penitently giving it all of ourselves. And that's good in word, but in practice, that is, for me at least, being extremely cognizant of the words I'm singing, of the people around me, so as to edify, that we are worshiping the God of the universe together, that I'm in tune with what you're saying, or with whatever brother is saying, that every minute of that hour of worship is intently focused on giving. And that's really not seen today in a lot of these buildings on Sunday morning.
Well, it's not typically the idea, and we've all heard the statement, well, I didn't really get much out of it. And what do we always say, well, you get out what you put in. We get more than we put in, but like you say, we should be emptying ourselves in that way. And that's what we see with this kind of devotion and faith that Abraham has. And so Chip went there, I wanted to open that door for just a moment, just to kind of, okay, what does that look like for us as Christians when we come and we're offering ourselves, right? And offering what we have to give, and offering from faith, the very best that we have, right? Thinking about those analogies from Old Testament worship to New Testament worship in that sense. And I think of the fact that you mentioned the idea of being prepared. We come prepared to give. And there's a word here that is found in verse 19. It's the word concluding, and in the King James, the word accounting is used. Accounting that God was able to raise him up. And it's a word, and it's used several times in Scripture, but it's the word that literally means we have the word concluded in the New King James, but he was reasoning in his mind. And so you get the picture for these 3 days as he is approaching Mount Moriah and getting to that point. He is going over this in his mind over and over. He is weighing all of the possibilities, weighing all of the things. He is preparing himself for what's about to happen in all of that. And so this is that word that is usually found as accounting or reasoning. He reasoned from the Scripture. And so this is the idea that he has spent time weighing all of this, considering it, pondering it, just going over and over in his mind as he's approaching. So this wasn't just a okay, well let's get there, and God's going to all have this all figured out, because some will lessen the idea of what this sacrifice is, because saying, well, see, he believed in the resurrection, so he knew God was just going to raise him up. And what Harold asked me just a moment ago, could you do that to your child? And he agonized over this for those 3 days approaching the mountain. And so that means that they camped on the way, and he had to think about it. You think he got much sleep thinking about those things? Harold? Right. Right. Yeah. That's a small portion of it, right? That's the result of all of that agonizing and reasoning and concluding, getting to that point, accounting of all of these things, right? Now, this is based on all of this, weighing all of this, this is what I'm going to be able to give. And it's not just the finances part of it. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
We all say we couldn't do that. I say I couldn't do it. I've got 4 kids. I couldn't do that. But we don't know what we would do because God told us to do it.
Sure. Absolutely. Thankfully, that's not what we have to do, right? So, and we're not tested that way. But certainly Abraham was, and we're reading about it now in a way that helps illustrate for us and for these Hebrew Christians the kind of faith that we need to be able to be faithful, right?
I know for a fact he was relieved, but I'm talking about a physical state. What type of physical state was he in after he was considered faithful and Isaac was saved from the blade? I would imagine very just weight off his shoulders, prepared to do what he had to do, counted as righteous, but that 3 days of deliberation, right? That 3 days, not necessarily deliberation, but just knowing it's going to happen, right? And taking step after step after step. And I like to think of ourselves after worship and what that feels like. It's not meant to be funny, but I said one time, Sunday afternoon naps are great. But honestly, why do I find myself more tired at noon on Sunday than any other day? I like to think it's because I spent time intentionally, emotionally giving on Sunday morning, and of course Sunday nights too.
Yeah.
I imagine he was
his face has probably been the same look that I've seen on faces, face after face who's come up out of the baptism. And to see that look, that expression, and joy and relief and the weight off of their shoulders, right? Thinking about all of that. So I would think in much the same way.
Wayne in this story too, I think about Isaac, if he was a smaller boy or a bigger boy, what the conversation between Abraham and Isaac must have been at the point where I'm going to tie you up, put you on this wood, and this is what's going to happen. I think if it was a larger child, it might have been able to fight, but there's no evidence that the child resisted or tried to run away, or that Abraham's faith must have spilled onto Isaac, and he probably assured him, just like, son, we're fixing to go through something, but God has promised that you're going to be the seed, and this is going to be okay. You have to look at his kid. The Bible scripture doesn't say I have to ask for him.
Right.
How did that conversation go? Yeah. Did Isaac see in the faith of his father for all those years and believe that, well, Dad says this is cool, that okay, Dad, I believe you. God may us down for let's go, let's do it. Probably not that. It just always makes me think. And the story changes over my life. You thought when you were a kid, you think about the kid and your parents, and then you're a parent, and then the story means something totally different. Now we look at it from a parent's standpoint, and it's interesting.
Yeah. Let's think about it from God's standpoint, right? What is he really? What is he really asking of him, right? What is it that he's looking for from Abraham? Trust me. Right? Trust me. And the connection then that is made, for generations to follow, is seen in that family line, because there was Isaac, and then Isaac has Jacob, right? And then you keep going, right? And then many nations, right, that come out of that. And then you're looking at Abraham. It's interesting because as Genesis opens, we're looking at the world growing, right, and spanning. Then all of a sudden we're looking at Abraham and that seed then begins to grow, right? And it's many nations once again, and then it's kind of cut back down, and then it's cut down to just Christ, and we follow Christ through that. Yes.
Think about the 3-day journey. Gave him plenty of time to think and logically come up with why he's doing the right thing. We react oftentimes with emotion, and we forget about how much we can trust God, because the emotion is the immediate reaction to almost anything. But if you can force yourself to step back and logically think about why I should trust God's going to get me through this because of all the things that have happened, that last part of that verse says, he concluded that he would probably be able to raise him from the dead, because he actually got him from the dead, because my wife's womb was dead,
Right.
I was dead.
There you go.
So he didn't go there immediately probably, but he concluded that.
He got to that point, right?
So he trusted in God, was looking for the trust.
Yeah.
Our trust is usually not immediate when things bad happen or we're asked to do something. But if we can force ourselves to look back on all the things logically that have happened in our lives that built the trust in our faith, then I think we can also make good decisions based on that logical conclusion as he concluded.
I think you're absolutely right. Let me I've got a quote from Marshall Keeble talking about this kind of faith, and I thought I'd share it because we're about out of time. But he said, if God commanded that Abraham was supposed to run through a brick wall, then he's supposed to have the faith. It was his job to do the running, and God was going to make the hole. And that's the idea. And for us today, this we have to reason and conclude and account for the fact that God is trustworthy. And so whatever it is that He has stated for us to do, we've got to do it. We just do it. Isn't that it? We do it. Let Him do His work on the other side, but we do what He says. And there are numerous things that maybe we do not fully comprehend and maybe understand, or maybe know that we may want to know or think that we need to know in some way. And yet God says, I want you to do this, and I want you to do it in this fashion. I want you to do it in this way. And that's some of what we've seen in the example, thinking about Noah. You know, we want you to do it this way. I want you to do it. Here are the details. I want you to follow the details here. And with Abraham, I want you to do this with Isaac. I know you love him. I know that he's the son of promise. Here's an interesting connection. You think about Isaac being a type of Christ in this sacrifice. Each were born as a result of a miracle. Each was the only begotten of his father. Each consented to be offered. Going back to what Jason said a moment ago, there's no indication that he's fighting against this. And so he consented to be offered. Each bore their own wood. He laid the firewood on Isaac, and he took it right, and as Christ obviously carried his cross. Each was sacrificed by his father. The place where each was sacrificed was the same mountain, Mount Moriah. Mount Moriah was stationed right upon, Jerusalem was built right there, the temple on Mount Moriah, and so forth. So you have that same location. I like what Wynn adds the point here that they were both in the prime of their life. Kind of goes back and gives you that picture of offering the very best, right? Offering the first fruit, offering not that which is lame and been turned out and so forth, but rather offering the very best. Each was dead for 3 days. In a figurative sense, right? Isaac was dead because he knew that he was going to have to sacrifice him. So I'll leave you with that for tonight. Thank you for all your comments, and hopefully our faith can continue to build upon that. We'll continue in Hebrews chapter 11. Lord willing, next week though we're gonna go to second year. We're gonna go just a little bit quicker, a little bit faster. But anyway, appreciate everyone being here tonight. Be safe traveling home.